Greetings from wherever you are watching us. This is Face to Face with the Gen Z. We call it the Face to Face with the young generation, a town hall discussion that brings together the young mind and of course the experience to just talk about everything and anything that happens to our country. And today we are full house, making sure that we have a young and a vibrant audience that will be here to ask the nitty and the very critical questions that they have. And we have a very experienced panelists here to make sure that they give us the answers that we deserve as the young generation and where the country is moving to. Remember that we are only a year and some months to the general election. And today we are saying that the Kenyan nation has a debt of at least above 12 trillion Kenyan shillings. Where is that debt? And are we feeling the cost or the multiplier effect of the development that is required, that is in accordance with the Constitution of Kenya? And of course, to help us answer these questions is one of the brilliant economists in the country, the brilliant mind, one in a million, is Mr. Kwame Owino. Now, Kwame Owino is a director of the Institute of Economics in Kenya, and he wants to give us a little bit of today's current debt. Is the Kenyan country debt strain, or we are just free, and what are we going to do moving forward? Mr. Kwame Owino, thank you so much for your time, and I yield the floor to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kwame Owino. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a think tank, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer. Now, so let me start with the fact that if you ask what single, it's never single one, but if you ask what question in Kenya's public affairs today will be relevant for the next 15 years, when most of Gen Zs will now get to be closer or will have worked for at least 10 or 15 years of their lives, as young people, that question is without doubt public debt. And the reason for that is, of course, while you're here, I'll advise you to, if you go to the Institute of Economic Affairs website, which is ieakenya.or.ke, click on publications, and under publications, you'll see dashboard, and under dashboard, you go for public debt. You will see that we have a running clock, which is basically a countdown, which measures Kenya's public debt, or rather reports on Kenya's public debt in real time, telling you what it is. And just before I sat here, I looked at it and it was telling us that Kenya's public debt was about 12, slightly less than 12.5 trillion Kenyan shillings. And it is growing at the rate of about 29,000 and a bit per second, growing at the rate of 29,000 and a bit. So that is basically 29,000 shillings per second. If you bunch that up all the way to for a whole day, it's close to about 2 billion per day, something like that. So in general, the public debt is not just growing, the numbers are large, but it's also going to be of consequence. For what reason? Because the public debt is an obligation that Kenyans owe, especially as taxpayers, and as young people as well, and all people who work. Anybody who works and breathes in Kenya will pay taxes to redeem that public debt. So it's not a debt that will not be paid by anybody else. At the same time, it's being paid by all generations. That is, present generation, younger people who will start working in a couple of years or a little more, and people who are who will come into the future. So it's our common obligation as Kenyans to be able to pay for that and to pay for that debt. So that's one. Two. The third issue is that public debt can be divided in two ways. One is by asking how much of that debt is owed to people who live in Kenya or who are Kenyans, and the second is what debt is owed to foreigners. And here the conversation needs to be a little bit more informed, because when you hear comments, some from Gen Zs, but also other people think that most of this debt is owed to foreigners. The truth is, now, for those 12.4 trillion shillings that we spoke about 55% of it is owed domestically. And then the rest, about 53%, and then the rest is owed to foreigners. For various reasons, and of course, sometimes it does shift one with the other. So that's the second point. So who is it owed? Is it paid? Yes. Now, that's not to mean that government doesn't pay debt. The reason the debt is growing is not that because government doesn't pay debt. It is because government is a rolling concern, so it is borrowing some more money and it is paying others. Do you see that? So the debt is basically an accumulation of the obligations that you come. So that's basically one. The other thing is anybody who's lending government of Kenya money is lending under the promise that the government of Kenya has never defaulted or will not default. It's a promise that we'll pay. And regardless of who we hold responsible for accumulating this debt. And for me, I share that responsibility between Parliament and the executive branch of government. So it is not, as many people think, the KRA's fault or the Treasury Secretary's fault. It's basically Parliament giving responsibility under Article 209 of the Constitution, which allows Parliament to approve expenditures and Parliament to approve payments and taxation, because the debt is paid through taxation. So that's the other thing that I think is essential to remember. So for as long as government runs, borrowing new money and paying a little others, the size of the debt will depend on whether you're paying faster than you're borrowing. And that because the debt is growing, it's telling you that the debt is growing a little faster than the payments are being made. I have to be clear as well, because many people here, and I hear people have started it. There's a language that came into Kenya a couple of years back, before the last election, which is that debt is not a bad thing. They say that debt is not a bad thing. It is said that debt is necessary to build infrastructure, to do a couple of other things. And that is a statement which is true, but for an economist, it has no consequences. It's not true that debt is not a bad thing. We need to ask ourselves what kind of debt is good and what kind of debt is bad, right? So the good debt is a kind of debt that basically is, one, invested in activities that generate sufficient money to pay for the debt and generate surpluses for the country. Do you guys get that? To just be basically equivalent to what a household or a corporation would do. But if you have debts that sink and create bigger obligations and cannot pay for themselves, then you cannot stand as a person of integrity. Be it a leader, be it a youthful person, regardless of your age, your professional standing, to say that debt is not a neutral thing. It isn't. It's not neutral at all. And it doesn't matter whether we owe it to foreigners or whether it's owed to a domestic audience. Debt means somebody owns you. Yes, somebody owns you. So that's basically the other thing. Now, debt is also measured in various ways, and it's also measured as economics tells you that basically how does wealth or how does a society become prosperous? A society becomes prosperous by the work that we do and the value of that work in monetary terms. So all the work that we do in a year as Kenyans, basically if you add it up, economists call it the gross domestic product, which is basically the addition of all the work and the income that we earn, because that means you're creating value as you're doing them. In Kenya's case today, all debt that is owed, all debt that is owed compared to the value that we create in a year is 70%. So that's when you hear people say debt to GDP, a ratio of one to the other, is 70%. It means that if we decided, or if somebody decided for us to pay all the debt today, right, it means we'd have to work for 10 months in the year to pay up all the debt that we owe, so that after the next 2 months, only then will we be working for ourselves. So it's not a small amount. I know that we also hear it stated in Kenya that yes, but the US and Japan owe 150% in debt. That's very true. That's very, very true. And some of those countries have bigger debt as a share of their annual output than we do. But this is every year they pay certain debt and then they borrow certain amounts, right? For Japan, there's something that's called the debt servicing cost, which is how much you're spending to pay back the debt that you owe, because obligations come every year. For every 100 shillings equivalent that Japan collects in revenues, right, only 12% is owed for debtor. Do you get that? For every revenue that, remember, government pays debt through taxes that you and I pay, all the taxes that are collected, because there's no place where you pick money and then you write a check and you pay for the debt. So because of that work that people have to do, government has to tax that work and then use that money to pay debt. In Japan today, for every 100 shillings equivalent, or 100 yen that government earns, which is the Japanese income, right? Only 12% of it is going to debt. In Kenya, it is 6 times that. In Kenya, government, 5.5 times rather. So it's basically for every 100 shillings in revenue that government collects, based on the data that was declared at the end of December, 64.8 shillings was going to pay in debtors. Do you see? So the government of Japan has 88 shillings, right? I mean, over every 100 to commit to public things out of the revenues that are raised. In Kenya, it is only 32 or 36. So basically, we need to be careful when we hear claims such as by Japan owes more. Japan owes more, but their debt pressure on public spending and on public is less. No wonder in Kenya today, while we say that the debt is low at 70%, and I'll come to a reason why that is not even true, but that's not exact. Japan doesn't have a problem spending on schools, all the things that government, right? In Kenya, while we are saying that this is 70, what is happening? Schools have not received last year's capitation, right? Schools are leaking. Do not think that it is by accident that government cannot respond to flooding. So all of us are here today, and we were very worried because many of us would know that as soon as 4 o'clock is up, I gave a notice myself, I need to leave for home. Because as the rains are predicted to come for today, you never know whether you have to climb a tree to save your life. I mean, I say that as a joke. But the point I'm trying to make you all understand as younger people is one debt number doesn't tell you anything. So the government of Japan is not constrained. The government of Kenya is telling parents, school feeding programs are out. You know that, right? School feeding programs are being cut. Capitation has been reduced. Remember what the cabinet secretary said, right? At the same time, students who are in universities, such as some of you, you know that your bursaries were not only delayed, but they've been cut. And if you look at the Higher Education Loans Board, which all of us are blaming, it's not even their fault. They've been given much less money than they required. So as I assessed, they required some money based of close to 12 billion. How much have they been given? Less than 6. So that means they're rationing the amount of money. So if somebody tells you about Japan and the US, tell them which Japanese children have not gone to school because the government is paying debt. In Kenya, we can point to thousands of them. You remember that little girl who was going to JS9, right? And had to walk from her home to the district education officers. No, they're not called district education officers anymore. Whatever it is, the regional or the county education officer, to say, look, I've been admitted, but my parents can't afford, and please do some intervention. Kenyans had to raise money for them. So ask yourself, Japan, 200% debt. Kenya is only 70, but no Japanese children are walking to plead to be admitted to schools. So we need all these things to actually be stated up here. And then finally, I'll end up with why that comparison doesn't make sense. You see, Kenya's case today, 70% of the debt is debt to GDP, right? As national output is what the debt is. And it looks tame. But the consequences that it has in the rest of the economy are severe, such as what you see. Public services are being reduced. Some medicines were not available. You remember a couple of last year, I'm talking about the year 2025, right? Some vaccines were not available in hospitals. Do you all remember? And government had to raise specific money to actually go and get it. Do you see that? That's not happening in Japan. That's not happening in the States. So we need to pick our comparisons very carefully. But more importantly, you all know, and some of it happened this year and previous years, some youth like yourselves who had businesses, right, under the youth, not the youth fund, but under the procurement rules which allow for the youth to, right? Some people supplied the public sector with goods or did some services, and they've not been paid for 3 years, right? So the 70% needs to be read in its context. So if you ask me, the public debt is not just the debt that government owes to banks and to foreigners. If you add the amount of people, the amount of money coming from businesses that supply public services and have not been paid, Kenya's debt is much, much bigger. Much, much bigger. And thirdly, you know that one of the things that the government has done, and they've done a heroic effort, I mean, I'm the first to give them credit for that, but one of the things they've done is that they're borrowing debt to pay debt. Do you see that? So it's not like they're extinguishing the debt. You're borrowing to keep running. So what is happening now is government is having to run harder to stay on the spot. So you're borrowing money to pay debt so that you can kick your payment dates into the future. In other words, regardless of which administration is here in 2032, we know that in 2033, 2034, right, will be crunch time for debt. So that government might have to borrow again, hoping they don't run out of time, and I fear they will run out of time. And when you run out of time, what happens? Something that's very bad called a default happens. And some countries on this continent have defaulted. So is anyone saying that the government of Japan is about to default? No. Is the government of Kenya is under something that's called debt distress. The debt distress problem is not similar. So basically, my intention here was to let you know that this is a critical thing. It's going to affect you for those, maybe your parents who are working today and most of your lifetime in your early parts of your career, and the taxation story and the public economic story in Kenya will be, how does the government of Kenya manage its debt? Thank you.
A round of applause for Mr. Kwame. Mr. Kwame, thank you so much for that insightful conversation and discussion that you have raised there. And you've said that the government is basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I just want
borrowing from Peter to pay Paul.
Borrowing. Right. Okay. Borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. And I want to open the floor for each and everyone who probably has a question to Mr. Kwame Owino, because he's leaving by 4 as he stated earlier. Okay. Let me start from there.
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Luke, and Mr. Kwame, I think we've met before. Last year when we were doing Okowa Uchumi at Sirena, and we had this discussion again. Now, I have a question, because in terms of understanding of public finance and debt, we know the government is trying to borrow more domestically. And the national government has also came up with a plan, the Wealth Sovereign Fund and the National Infrastructure Fund. I think these two are meant to help us so that in the near future, we are not going to borrow more externally, and we can use our own source of income and to pump money in these two funds to help us stop much borrowing. So what is your explanation to this? Because that is what I think, as we understand that is the right direction for us so that we can cater for the public debt. Thank you.
Should I answer? Let him speak. I don't know words. Yeah. Should I answer that?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Tony Blair Onyango, and I think I've also been part of your forums at the Institute of Economic Affairs before. So I'd want to know, Kwame, what is the place of predatory lending, for example, because I believe some of these loans have come at the backdrop of what you call structural adjustment programs. And then also in one of the forums, I heard people mention that some of the existing remedies include debt restructuring, debt rescheduling. So I'd also love to hear your insights around the same. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You can go. Okay, fine. Yes. So you asked two questions. The second one was a sovereign wealth fund and investment fund. What was the first? Sorry, I didn't have time to write.
The first question was for the Wealth Sovereign Fund and the National Infrastructure Fund, and how the government is planning to stop much borrowing in the near future, because that is the direction the national government is taking, to explain how they are going to curb unnecessary debts or from external borrowers.
Okay. Now, you know, there's a difference when you're handling public finance, which is how there's a difference between substance and style. So what is a sovereign wealth fund? A sovereign wealth fund is like as concept of fund. It's not a new thing. Many countries globally have it. There are about 90 countries that have a sovereign wealth fund. What is it? It is a saving. It's like an account where government saves money, but then it uses it to invest, whether in infrastructure and all that. Kenya's sovereign wealth fund is built in this way. It comes from money that the government of Kenya will receive from privatization proceeds. You know, the Kenya Pipeline Corporation, there's the other one with the natural resources and all that. So government of Kenya intends to save that money, right? Yes. And then use that to build infrastructure. So for instance, right? Yes. Now, if you move money by privatization, that money is available for government to either use for today's needs or to save. Okay, right? Yeah. So it's just basically moving money from one pocket to the other. So I don't think there's any magic in sovereign wealth fund at all. There isn't. But the second one, and more important one, is globally, countries that have sovereign wealth fund, and we have an obsession with Singapore, Kuwait, and all that. Countries that have sovereign wealth funds have two things. One, they have governments that do not have budget deficits. So I did not tell you this, and maybe this was I was remiss. The way debt is accumulated is this. The government of Kenya today, based on the numbers that have been declared and which Cabinet Secretary Mbadi declared to Parliament last year, the government intends to spend about 11 billion shillings, about 10.8 billion shillings per day, but collects taxes of about 7.8 billion per day. Meaning, the government is spending 12 billion per day, right? Of which 3 billion is borrowed. Do you guys get that? Now, debt is the accumulation of those deficits. That's why you have debt. So it's accumulation, it's a historical factor, that the fact that you've borrowed, you've spent much more money than you raised in taxes, and therefore you've built this pile of debt which needs to be paid for. And that debt is raised, has an interest rate, because you're paying people on the basis of an interest rate. So tell me, government today is borrowing, whether domestically or externally, rather domestically through treasury bills and treasury bonds. But let's talk about treasury bonds. Treasury bonds that were last released, I think in February or late January. For every 100 shillings that you lend government in a treasury bond, government was going to pay you 13 shillings and I think 40 cents, 13.50. Do you see that? So that at the end of the year, government for every 100 that you lent it owes you 113 shillings and 50 cents, right? Sovereign wealth funds, the return on a sovereign wealth fund is usually 6%. So here you have a government that is borrowing at 14%, but investing money in something that brings in 6%. That does not make sense anywhere. And that's not a political opinion, that's a mathematical opinion. I mean, a mathematical fact. So we have become hostage to facts, speaking about sovereign wealth fund, and the political people going all the way up have become very fluent with speaking that language, sovereign wealth fund. It's nothing, to be honest. If you're borrowing at 14%, 13.5%, and then investing that money or investing other money. So our perspective at the Institute of Economic Affairs would be, if you sell correctly, the Kenya Pipeline Corporation privatization in our view was the correct decision. But what should it have been used to do? You should have used that money to retire public debt, not sent it into another account that's going to give you 6%, and then you're borrowing again at 14%. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't matter who's arguing it. They can have PhDs, they can have, you cannot debate with maths. That is a silly decision to make. That's it. That's the reality of it. Whether it's infrastructure or what. So let's talk about the infrastructure fund. This is what the infrastructure fund tells you. The infrastructure fund is also part of this, right? It's coming from the privatization proceeds. If you had 200 billion shillings, or say the 100 and so that we got was received from privatizing Kenya Pipeline, the correct decision in our view. Government has no business running businesses. It should let the private sector run businesses and then collect taxes and provide the regulation. So it's a correct decision, even if it's dicey and this government is not trusted, so people think that there's some bad news happening across. In my view, if you have a country that's leaking in infrastructure like we have, people are dying every day, you have a famine that takes place, and kids that are missing school, right? Economists can tell you this, and you can check out that the highest investment that a government can make is in human capital. We have a huge young population. That is an advantage for this country, provided you invest in building the capability of Kenya's young people. So, something like 70% of the students, 7%, our turnover, or rather, our transition rate, which is the number of students who leave primary school and go to secondary school, is less than 70%, which means you're losing 30% of those students, not because they don't want to go to school, but because they can't afford to go to school. They can't afford the fees. So even if they start, they're not finish. The highest return and investment a government can make is in its people. So you're having people not completing high school, but you're building roads and bridges for them to come up. Because you want to cut ribbons and look like you're chasing Singapore. So these are wrong decisions based on the reality of Kenya. So I am not impressed at all by the Sovereign Wealth Fund and Investment Fund. There are things coming ahead of their time, and the prioritization is the wrong kind. So that's my question. Now, on the debt rescheduling and debt predatory lending, I disagree. You see, I'm a student of economics. I don't have a PhD. I think I'm well educated, but I don't have a PhD. But if you go to the Treasury in Kenya, the Treasury in Kenya has some more PhDs than some universities in Africa, including in this country. They're not daft people, so don't get the impression that when I criticize them, I'm saying them. That I'm just saying that where did you leave what you studied? And you're making decisions like you didn't go to an economic school. That's the question I'm asking. Now, predatory lending is this. Predatory lending is, I don't want you to, what is predatory lending? It's the way those people who take your money through. Let me give the best example. The simplest example is those mobile phone apps that lend you money and then it starts to grow in a way. You don't even know how much you took and then every day. No, you cannot tell me that anybody would do that kind of thing on the government of Kenya. The laws for public borrowing in Kenya are very clear. They start from the Constitution, the Public Finance Management Act, and there are also regulations in the public sector. So the idea that there's predatory lending to the government of Kenya is an excuse that we should stop giving clever people excuses to ride on. When somebody is borrowing money from Treasury, on Eurobond, it's a very complicated financial transaction. And they do it well, or everything is, they hide it from us until it is done, but it's a very, very heavily regulated process. And lawyers all over and all these other people. So no, don't give the government of Kenya excuses by saying that somebody came and lent them money and is now, like they took a Fuliza loan. No, come on, please. Ask these guys who are all very bright and have PhDs, how do PhDs make decisions like this? What was the incentive for you to pick such a bad loan and then hand it over to us? So I don't agree. Now, what is debt rescheduling? Debt rescheduling is this. If the government owes money, like happened, and it's coming due on a certain date, because this, as I told you, these are transactions that are contracts. You don't just borrow money for the public through a word of mouth thing. It's not like you and your friend lending yourselves money and saying, look, when the month ends, I'll send you by amount, right? And somebody has to call and say, Lisa, how? No. The government of Kenya has a public debt management office, which understands how much was borrowed, how much is being paid, and when each loan is due. So rescheduling means a loan is due for repayment on a certain day, either the interest or the principal amount that was lent, right? And if the money is not available or it's too high, much more than you are, you can negotiate with whoever you owe to stretch the loan so that you're rescheduling it, to allow time for that. So that's what basically a rescheduling is. A default is what happened in a few countries in this continent, where on the day a loan comes due, it happened in one of our best friends in this continent, Ghana, right? A couple of years back. On a Monday when the loan was due, it just wasn't paid because there's no cash. And that means there's a default. You have obligations that it hasn't been paid for. And that's it. So that's basically the rescheduling default language. Thanks.
Yes, you can ask.
I want to ask Kwame a question. And having the rolling, I'll call it the rolling balance of debt in Kenya.
Yeah.
There's this feeling, I'll call it a feeling in Kenya, that we do not know how much Kenya owns, because there's not been proper records from time immemorial on how much we borrow, how we pay. We seem to be in the dark about it. Has IEA been in a position to understand that?
Okay.
Borrowing.
Okay. Let's give the government
Advice, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah. So first of all, I would want to appreciate that. I think some of you, I'm having a lot of learning about the aspect of and the concept of debt generally. But my question is this. When I remember historically in this country, during the Jubilee administration, I used to listen a lot to Mbadi and David Ndii. And they sounded like they really understood what needs to be done. They sounded like they really understand the economics that this country needs. My understanding of economics is a bit limited. But with the time, I'm getting this impression that every time I listen to economists, all of them sound brilliant. And all of them always sound like they understand what they're doing. Now, when I look at the country, I really do not want to believe that the CS Treasury, the CEO of CBK, the advisor on economic affairs, and all the qualified people that we have in Treasury, I don't want to be persuaded that all of them do not understand what they are doing, and the only person who understands what they are doing is Kwame. I also want to understand, why is it that economists who always sound like they know what they are doing are always the ones who are not in government? Because when Mbadi was not in government, he sounded exactly like you, and all of us wished. When the CEO and when David Ndi was not in government, they all sounded exactly like you. I don't know whether my colleagues agree with me. Today we are listening to you, and I can assure you, seated here listening to you, you sound like you're the solution this country needs. But this is exactly what I have felt with all other economists. So is the problem economics as a course, or is the problem economists joining government?
Okay, so first, let me say this. Economics is a subject that is taught to human beings, right? And it has specific methods for reaching conclusions and decisions. That's one. Economists work in government, and especially if they're advising in a political space where there are opinions or they only answer questions that they're given. I must not give that impression. Please don't give me a role I have not taken and the IE has never given. I've never said I'm a solution to Kenya. I don't want to be. Well, I'm not. So that I refuse to take. That it is not my responsibility. My responsibility is to pay my taxes. I do that. And I've done that for a very long time. I wish they'd give me a tax cut. Secondly, it is also true that we have to be conscious about the fact that when people work for government, they work under certain constraints. One of the things that the Jubilee administration did, the administration that we have today, the UDA, the Kenya Kwanza administration did when they were doing, there was a debate about what Kenya should have done with its debt. And some people contemplated, I agree, Kenya should have considered the option of a default. And they said it completely that we will not, under any circumstances. When a decision such as that is made, the consequence is what you see. And it was predictable. There'll be a deterioration in public service delivery, such that you have capitation in schools in some cases were as much as 4 months behind, which is a whole term, right? In other words, you're going through the term and the capitation has not been brought, right? You see it. Headmasters are now saying, rather, the core principals now are saying, we have schools, capitation has not been sent to us, we can't feed kids. And they're having to charge parents to be able to keep kids in school. That was predictable. Any economist who tells you that's not it doesn't know what he is doing. What they do when they get to government and what they're placed under is a different one. Second, Mr. Mbadi is extremely competent. The last time I heard, he's a public accountant, not an economist. So please don't impose on him. Now that's what I mean he's not qualified. I'm simply saying that's basically what. So in doing his oversight work as a member of parliament, placed him in a different position from the one he is in today as a cabinet secretary. Do you guys get that point? And as we sit here as public economists as well, our work is not to do PR for government. Our work is to say Kenyan lives would be better if you made this and that. So what we do as public economists sitting in a think tank as we do, our work is to make sure that government doesn't make big mistakes, because big mistakes have big consequences. And so that's what keeps us, yes, in this place where basically what we are looking at is to push the envelope towards making sure that the best decisions are made and the worst ones are deferred or at least not made. Now, so I think one of you asked about the integrity of the public debt register. As I told you, in my view, if a decision that is taken in the public sector, especially in finance, public finance, is wrong, right? It is not a decision that was taken because people don't know what they're doing. As I told you, the government of Kenya has fantastic infrastructure and rules and institutional makeup. If you go to the treasury, you have all directors. We also know we have a public debt management office which keeps the record and reports on public debt to parliament every year. So the decisions that were made, even when parliament during the Jubilee administration, I think 4 or 5 times they came to the parliament, treasury came to the parliament and asked for the debt ceiling to be raised, right? while they knew what its consequences are, or maybe they didn't ask, it was clear. So nothing was hidden. So I am one person who sits back here, and if I must defend the government of Kenya, that's not my role, and I don't like it. I think that Kenya's public debt register has very high integrity. So everything that is in there are people we owe money. Why? Because the rules are very clear. If you remember, I think in 2023 or thereabouts, the Auditor General's Office actually audited Kenya's public debt records and found, with the exception of just a few things about exchange rates that were applied and everything else, the public record is not something that, the public debt register is not something that you would raise quibbles with. So the problem is not on the end, the payment end. The problem is the levels of transparency before the borrowing is done. And whose responsibility is that? Parliament. And Parliament has left the cabinet secretary with a credit card. Anytime they want to swipe that credit card, they swipe that credit card. So that's the problem. So our problem is on the debt procurement side, not on the repayment. Do you guys get the point? It's like, if I owe, it's as if I had a freezer, right? The problem is not when the piper comes for his money. The problem is the looseness with which public money is
spending.
And that is basically a spending problem. So that's it. So I wouldn't say look at the Public Debt Management Office and say they are fiddling records. No, but I would look at the Treasury and Parliament and say, you guys are borrowing too much money. And you know why Parliament has a bad incentive? You see, we have allowed Parliament, and this is one thing, we have allowed Parliament and Kenya to create every fund. So you know the CDF, which many Kenyans think is a big deal. Now, the CDF is established as a quantum, as a share, 2.5% of all spending. So what? It is unconstitutional, precisely. But one of the things is, if you are going to spend 2.5% of a sum, you want a big sum, including if it is borrowed. So basically, we've structured the incentives improperly, such that it undermines the role of Parliament in trying to stop aggressive spending and borrowing. That is the problem. The problem is not the record side. The problem is not the record side, because these are contracts. So that, should it still be examined? It must be examined. But I don't think we're going to find big errors on that side. For what concerns me as somebody who's examined this, is we've just seen. Oh, I need to mention as well, it's not always been like this. I mean, for all his faults, and yet many, when President Kibaki left, I told you that in Japan, it's 12 shillings out of every 100 shillings of revenue that is used to spend to pay debt. When President Kibaki left, it was 21. Today, it is 67, as I told you, 64, 65, 67. Do you guys see that? So it's a disease that afflicted us when Kenya started this idea of building infrastructure, those shiny projects. We are building stadiums all over, building the standard gauge railway, which was promised. They say that it's going to contribute 1% of GDP as a single project. And that's when you know that whoever is saying that doesn't know what they're talking about. So I will end with this. The problem is not the register itself by shady loans and the possibility that we have debts that were not predatory lending or debts that were not. They were procured at rates that Parliament should ask when you're borrowing. How much are you borrowing that this Eurobond loan for? They didn't ask that. And that's why we are here. So we owe people and it needs to be paid.
Okay. John, you go first.
He just mentioned the standard gauge railway. And it may be a comment, it may be a question for you to just respond to. We have the standard gauge railway. It's functional, we have it. We can do nothing about it. But I believe that having it stalled at Naivasha is not making value. And the extension of it as we are planning will make value, because now we'll have it as a transit hub that now we can be able to look at getting back the investment that we made. Do you agree?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good question. Yes, having the standard gauge railway end in Naivasha. I mean, the plan was actually to have the railway line all the way from Mombasa to Malaba, so that it could connect into the rest of East Africa, and that's fine. The problem with infrastructure is not where it ends. The problem is, what did it cost? And if you look at the Standard Gauge Railway, it was opened. The Nairobi to Mombasa part was opened in 2017, just before 1st of June, just before the elections, right? You remember that one? And the president ruled on it, and it was a big one. The problem is not that. The problem is the cost at which it was built is so high, and the interest rates are so high that it can't pay for itself. Now, constructing it from Naivasha all the way to the west would be a good thing because it means you'll add more volume to cargo for it, right? But the cost that was cited yesterday is,
500 billion.
yes, another 500 billion. I'm not too sure it's going. So there was an option. There were 3 options to construct the Standard Gauge Railway. The first one was to refurbish the old railway line. Remember, Kenya has a railway line of several, 100 years and a bit, which the British published. It was to refurbish it. The second was to rebuild it afresh based on the same wayleaf, the loan. And then we went for the most expensive, which is a new Standard Gauge Railway, and using a different route, which means you have to pay people for the land and do all those other things. I think that decision doomed us. I don't think that railway line will pay for itself. Because last year, based on the reports from the Kenya Railways Corporation, which tells you how much money was made. If you pick all the money, if you put together all the money since 2017 to 2024, which was used for the railway line, right? All the money that was does not even pay 2 years of the loan. You guys get that? In other words, if you talk about how for the first 7 years, is it 7 years of the Standard Gauge Railway from 2017, of course it started in the middle of the year, to the end of 2024, put all that money together, right? It does not even pay the loan value for the first 2 years alone. So it was already 4 years behind. So I think mathematically, that part from Nairobi to Naivasha was already doomed. And if you look at the amount that was used in constructing it per kilometer going back down into the west, it's almost the same. So it means that yes, even if you're going to raise more volume, but you've doubled your obligations in terms of the whatever. However, if the interest rates are lower, then it is possible. But I don't see that part from Nairobi to Mombasa being able to pay for itself, regardless of how much of the rest of the property, the rest of the cargo will come from the rest of the region. So I am conflicted about whether it should have been constructed at that rate, not whether it should have been constructed at all. There's a difference between, do we need infrastructure? We need it. But we can't construct infrastructure at any price because it has to be paid for.
Thank you so much. And I want Mr. Willie to come in here. You seem to be agitated because Kwame Wino says the costs are too high.
I think what we need to first ask ourselves about this debt. At the beginning of the 2023-2024 financial year, and now, the difference on what we owe is about 3 trillion. This 3 trillion, is it as a consequence of additional borrowing or interest? Number 2, when we throw in absolute figures, like you see when Moi left, it was 600 billion, and now it is 12 trillion. You also need to remember that when Moi left, the national budget was only 500 billion, and the dollar was only 35 bob. I saw a heading in the Standard yesterday. But because we are conditioned to look for, criticism makes better speeches than praises. The Standard wrote that, I don't remember very well what the words say, there are only 2 words, but they were suggesting that the new railway is now going to cost 1.71 trillion per kilometer, billion per kilometer, up from 675. But when you look at the math they did, they took the whole amount for building the railway from Naivasha to Malaba, but divided with the distance to Kisumu. You see that what they did? And Gen Zs, when they see that red line, they don't read the newspaper.
True.
They just say bus in Wizi. Number two, we also need to look at, this debt for building the railway comes in dollars. When we started doing the railway line from Mombasa, it was in 2014. The dollar was 88 shillings. We are now doing this one at 130. But we still convert this in Kenya shillings and tell the Gen Z, that one was done at this rate. This one is at this is now theft. Because when we are in a democracy like the one we have now, we are governed by propaganda. When we are in autocracy, we are governed by the gun and the bludgeon. So what I'm trying to say, majority of the things we consume from the media is propaganda. So we need to look back at them and say, what are really the figures? And also, where I would separate my paths with Kwame is saying that it doesn't matter where the project goes to, what matters is the cost. When you build an SGR at 370 billion from Mombasa and terminate it in a game park, and then the revenue from it per year is 1.1 billion, you can never make even. You cannot even repay it, because even without interest to make even, you need 370 years. Of course, we know building such things are not entirely for economic purposes, but also for growth purposes of the society. But I think we also need to find out, who do we really blame for the Kenyan debt as at now as we sit? Who are we going to blame? Because the moment you say government everywhere, they don't see Moi's government, they don't see Uhuru's government, they don't see Kibaki's. They see the one that we have. And we need to explain to ourselves how the 3 billion increase came about. It can come even without borrowing a cent. I also watched another podcast by one Simiyu, doing a class 3 maths on the debt. You see, Uhuru left it at 8.8 trillion, and Ruto has now borrowed 3.5. Now it is 12 point what? And you see, and some people are laughing. And they call those people laughing stupid. I don't know what kind of mathematics he used, but I was assuming that when we have such a debt, which majority of it is even local, where we pay the people we borrow at 10%, those treasury bonds, don't you expect that the interest alone should be that 3.5 billion on top, or 1 trillion on top? So we need to be factual about things. There's a type of propaganda which involves giving people piecemeal information, or only the pieces you want. There's a day we sat here watching our TVs, and President William Ruto was in Dagoretti, and he said, people who go and break people's shops and steal, and then went on to say, such people you need to shoot them in the leg. When I watched TV in the evening, it was saying Ruto orders the shooting of protesters. And they replayed it from the such people. They didn't start from people who go breaking into shops and assaulting the police. They started the news from such people. That is the day I knew we don't have a media. We have a propaganda tool. Sorry, Kwame, there was a question I asked in the beginning. It is time for you to answer.
Yes. Okay.
It's
First, I think the first thing is, for me, I sit here, so I think this is important for context to understand what I say. I sit here as a Kenyan citizen who perhaps is privileged to have a pay slip every month, and I look at how much I give to the government, and it's enormous in my view. That is a government I am not going to treat with praises. That's My personality doesn't allow me to praise human beings. And secondly, when you're taking more than 30% of my income every month, I don't plead with you to give me answers to public affairs. It doesn't go in my personality, but it also doesn't go with the job we think we are supposed to do. So it is true. There are two things that drive the quantum of debt, which is, as I told you, there's external and there's internal. So for the external debt, two things means. It means it is borrowed in a foreign currency. So the risk among the things that might drive it is what? If the Kenya shilling gets weaker, which means depreciation, then obviously because the government of Kenya collects the money in Kenya shillings, that debt quantum gets higher. Right? That's the first. And the second is the interest. If the interest rate is high, that too. And the third thing is the time period over which the debt will be paid. That, to be honest, is standard 8 months. And it's not arguable with. It isn't. So those things drive the debt quantum. Secondly, I think you asked a question which is basically about government is a going concern. The constitution doesn't say that the government belongs to President X, or President Y, or President Moi, or President Kibaki. Irrespective of which government borrows that money, as a Kenyan taxpayer, it has claimed your future income because you're going to pay, whether you liked that president or not, or whether they shot you in the legs or shot you somewhere else. That's not a luxury we have. And that's the reason why we must be dispassionate about how we handle these questions. Now, the media might have their own ways of posturing public debt, but I want you to hold me as the Institute of Economic Affairs to what I say, not how the media does their job. I don't tell people how to do their job, but I am governed by institutional ethics. Everything we say is published. We don't make mistakes. When we make them, we'll fix them. So you can take the numbers that I give you as representative of the integrity I have as a researcher for the stuff that I say. So what's driven the debt since 2020? It's also true that if you say that President Kibaki left when Kenya owed 40 billion and now it's X billion, it means the entire amount has been. That's not the correct way. No economist worth would put it like that. So how do we put it? We usually put it, and that's why I told you why we measure debt as a share of GDP. When President Kibaki left, which is 2014, debt as a share of GDP was about 44. Do you guys see it? Why? 44 as a share of the GDP for that year. So today, when it's 70 as a share of an even bigger GDP, it tells you that it's gone by a bit. Some of that interest is interest that is not necessarily the responsibility of the existing government. But when you're in a government, and what do they say? Nikiacha Biblia chini, right? You start managing the whole economy. You do not have the luxury of excuses for presidents who passed on and presidents who retired. Managing the Kenyan economy becomes your responsibility at that point. Even if we know the reality is some of the burdens you're taking are not necessarily the choices that you yourself made. So that's important to clarify. So what has driven some of that debt? What drives the debt domestically is the interest rate and the amount that is borrowed. And if you're borrowing every 2 weeks 20 billion at 13%, you are raising the interest rates. That's very high. So that's going to raise. And interest rates are actually the killers because they accumulate over time, right? The principal here and the interest rates. So if you're borrowing money at 13% per year, which is what the government did in March, 13% per year for every 100 shillings, you're going to pay 113. What does it mean? Simple math again, this standard 8 month, it means after 7 years, the amount that you need to pay is double because the interest rates cumulatively have matched the principal. Simple. So yes, what it means is we need a disciplined borrowing plan, but also the borrowing plan has to be for something that will generate income. And brings me back to, it's true. You know, your debtor doesn't care if you build a strategic, you build a train, SGR, and leave it on Kwame's house, my compound. The point is, the debt clock is running.
That's a problem.
So regardless of where you left it, the debt clock is running. And that is an asset that is not generating value to pay for itself. That's the judgment I am making. And that judgment tells you that whoever did that and terminated the SGR into a national park was economically illiterate or malicious, perhaps both. Thank you.
A round of applause for Kwame.
Sorry, before Kwame goes,
Yes.
I want to ask him a question.
Yes, please.
Kwame, do you think creating sovereign fund to run away from borrowing was a good thing? And if you are the president, what would have been your way of dealing with the debts?
And my question also is in relation to what Mwalimu is asking. He's asked about the sovereign fund. I want to replace the sovereign fund with the pension funds that we have. You know, a lot of money lies in those funds. I don't know how they're invested, you know, going forward. But don't you think government should think about how we can better borrow? I know we have a problem with trust and spending in this country, but don't you think it would have been a good, place to borrow from the pension fund for some of these investments, like we have in the developed world?
Okay, I'll start with your question, John. Thanks.
Yes.
So the questions, these are sound questions asking, shouldn't the pension funds, and you all know if you work, you're required to save some of your money for your own retirement, which is a good thing, and then because we all get old eventually and we'll have to retire, stop working, and we need money to be able to survive upon our retirement. Pension funds already are some of the biggest buyers of treasury bills or treasury. Sure. In fact, one of the problems I have with the pension funds that I've been saving with the pension fund for 22 years since I started work. My employers inflicted that on me. I was happy at that time because they are taking 12.5% of my income. Now I'm glad because over that period, I've seen that little money grow. And it's a little bit above inflation. So in a way, it's something that I'm proud that I made the right decision, even if I wasn't too happy at the time. But pension fund, I ask the people who run our pension fund, I'm usually very harsh with them. Look, if government is borrowing, is taking treasury bills at 14, sometimes, or rather, treasury bonds at 13%. And at the end of the year, you are giving me a 10% return, which is decent. Why should I hire you? Where is your professional input? Do you guys get that? So pension funds actually have been, and I think that the ease with which government gets money from pension funds and Kenyan banks is part of the reason we have the borrowing problem that we have. So that's fine. It's fed government appetite for borrowing in a way. Now, let's come to this strategic sovereign wealth fund. As I said, sovereign wealth funds have their place. They come from countries with big surpluses, not deficits. Big surpluses, such as Singapore, Kuwait. Many countries have them, but they don't have a material change in how government behaves or anything else. Kenya, as I told you, is spending 11.8 billion per day, of which 3 billion is borrowed. So what are you saving? Do you get it? It's as if I went and took a loan, right, for which I'm paying 14%, and then I'm saying I took the money that I took from a loan and then I saved it. Do you guys get that? It's a negative carry for any financial. So if I was the president, because you asked me, if I was the president and the right decision was made and Parliament gave that authorization, of course, it was also debated in Kenya, to privatize public assets gives government the opportunity to spend. Should have sent this money into a sinking fund to pay the public debt, not to establish a sovereign wealth fund, because there's no wealth to save. That's it. So that's what we've done.
Okay, just hold on. Thank you so much, Mr. Kwame Owino. I want to bring this first part of the conversation on a close, and with that, I want Mr. Advice to give me your take on whatever has happened here in terms of public sector.
Thank you very much. I was not quite very prepared for that. But first of all, I think it's been very insightful listening from Kwame. I think my first time listening to him live. I've always listened to him most of the time on TV. And like I said, just as intelligent as I thought he sounds today is how I thought he sounds even on TV and many other economists. But I also feel like sometimes it's very, very important. And I understand where professionals like Kwame come from, because it's not their responsibility to talk about context It's only their responsibility to give you the facts as they are. But now, governments are also run in context. And the reason why there is public animosity and how people react to different things is not necessarily on the basis of those facts as they are, but also on the basis of, if they are put in the right context, then there is better understanding of the country. Because all of us would be able to feel like, and that's why I asked the question, does it mean that the best economists are always the ones who are not in government? Because what I get is that the ones who are not in government are always the ones who sound like they are the brightest. But when I check the qualifications of all economists, including some of my friends who work at the Treasury, they are some of the best, they have some of the best CVs. And it makes me not want to imagine that you leave your brains at the doorstep of entry into government. And so I must be able to contextualize and understand what is the context of every government. Because when we understand context, then we'll place the right judgment on every government. I understand that, of course, we always say that governments exist, what do we say? Governments exist perpetually. But the truth is the judgment of government is not done perpetually. It is done as per the office holder then. And therefore, for us to be able to place the right interest in the office holders of government at that time, it's important that we understand context. How did they come in? What was our burden? What was our problem? And what have they done so far? When we get that context, it makes us be able to ask them the right questions. But when we make wholesome judgment and just say, this thing is like this and it's like this, the perception of the people out there, because not everyone, I can imagine myself, I consider myself a bit enlightened and educated. But I'm learning a lot from Kwame, and there are so many things he says that I do not understand. Now, if I consider myself slightly above average among the rest of Kenyans, then I'm trying to imagine what the rest of Kenyans would actually be feeling like listening to that. That's why it's important for everything to be put in context, so that people understand that under this regime, this is what was able to be done. This is how they have failed, and this is how they have gained. So that way we put the right question. Otherwise, when we have a President William Ruto administration, but our level of blame is from 1963 up to today, when our debt was about 2 to 3 billion, up to today, and then we lump all that on him, because then we have not understood context. Sometimes it sponsors us to have a very good anger, but on the wrong person and at the wrong time. But when we get context, I think we get it in a better share. That's why I feel like it's important. The facts are very clear, and I get where the professionals come from. But I think it's also important that everything is put in context, because when we put everything in context, our judgment also becomes fair. We'll be able to understand that President Uhuru Kenyatta left us with a debt of about, is it 10 or something? Is it 9 or something trillion? Okay. And that was the highest since independence that we had. We'll be able to understand that the other one left us at a certain point. Then we'll be able to know that going forward, even when we ask the people who want to take over government, we'll ask them the right questions. We will tell them that as the young people, we have understood that through the lessons we have had with Kwame and others, our debt is now at this point. And we feel the problem is here. What do you intend to do? But if context is not understood, Kwame, what happens is that good presentation like yours is taken then as opposition fodder without your intention. Then when it becomes opposition fodder, it is just used to help increase the amount of anger in the young people and in the country. And then it gets us the next leader. Then the next leader gets us into a deeper hole of debt. And then again, we come and listen to you, and then you give us very good presentation, and it now helps us hate the one who is in office then. Then the opposition again at that time becomes the ones who become beneficiaries, and then they come to the office the next ones. And that's why I feel like context is always something that we must also be able to play very heavy leverage on. But generally, I think it's quite a very insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Tony. Do you have anything you can add on?
Yes, mine would be to appreciate the work being done at the Institute of Economic Affairs. As I said earlier on, I've been part of their activities. I've also interacted with some of their documents, but also really to appreciate that Kwame has been very objective toward the discussion. Where there's good decisions, he has acknowledged. Where there have been miscalculations, he has also acknowledged. So mine would be to appreciate your work and really to continue praying that the work that you do really helps this country to move forward, and really just keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause for Tony. Miss Joan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think I understand where Kwame is coming from, because he's looking at government as a going concern. The way Mundalo, the way Mundalo is bringing it up, it's like, you're looking at administration per administration. And from where Kwame is coming from, he works for the Institute of Economic Affairs, and they try to advise government as government. Yeah, it doesn't matter that the problem happened earlier. Of course, we know, and they may know where the problem happened, but they don't want to look like they are into the politics. Into the political aspect of it. It's advising government as and how government moves. And thank you very much, Kwame. That was great insights that we get. I don't think Kenyans understand the issue of debt well, and maybe when you get time, we can have longer discussions around it. And I think Gen Zs also, you need to interrogate these numbers very well. Need to interrogate, understand why we are borrowing, and at what level should we borrow, and compare with other jurisdictions with an open mind. And thank you, Kwame.
Thank you. Can I contribute something? Just to one.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Well, look. I think if you're a Kenyan citizen, you need to choose what you're going to be angry about. And I think being angry at a government is not useful, because they're still taking 40% of your income anyway. But I think what you need to show is to show concern and expect high standards of performance in government.
Sure.
We must never hide behind this question of context, because some of the guys we are saying who they started administration in 2022 have been in government since 1997. Do you guys see that? So yes, context is important, but don't allow politicians to use it as an excuse for not doing the right things. When you have a country that has this level of debt, to the extent that you're now cutting school feeding programs and you're cutting capitation grants, I think that's a problem that needs to be solved irrespective of where it came from. So thanks for listening here. Don't go out there being angry, but don't let anybody bully you by telling you are missing the context. No, we are living in the world today and we feel its pains, and somebody needs to respond to it. And that person is basically the people who have the authority to govern us. Both Parliament, which approves every single shilling that the Republic spends, and the executive branch of government, right, which manages the nerve center of public finances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for you.
And another thing that Kwame keeps saying, and I think I mentioned it the last time we had a discussion here, is Parliament is the one that approves. The budget process is very well, articulated in the Constitution and in law. So Parliament approves with the authority here.
Article 114.
Yeah, with the authority. So let's get involved. Let's get involved in the budget making process as much as possible and follow it up.
Thank you. A round of applause for Mr. John. Mr. Widi, you can.
Before we send you off, Kwame, we have to thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Because this is the first time we are having serious debate on an issue. We have been following with the wind, but there is something I want to tell all of us. Kwame is academic, as we are political. That is why his decision that we should be having the assets sold and used to retire debt is the correct thing. But in a political scenario like the one we have, Sifuna will ask you what you have done.
Context.
So you can't borrow, you can't get that money and use it to pay debt and sit back doing nothing. And that is why you now saw they changed tune and they said, we are not going to judge the president by projects, because even dictators do projects. So this is the scenario we find ourselves as people who politically govern a country. And the only thing that I want you to help me do is to let the people know where there is propaganda with this land. Today, every Kenyan, including very educated ones like me and you, believe Uhuru left the debt at 8.9. But you see, that was 2022 budget reading. Budget reading of 2023-2024, it was 1.1 trillion. And they don't want to use that in their reporting. They use 8.9. So that is where we find ourselves. But Kwame, I'm very grateful. If we invite you here one more time, kindly honor and come. These guys need to know things such as the one you have told them.
Very true.
A round of applause for Mr. Kwame. Thank you so much. We give you the